Hi, thank you for joining us on The Unvarnished Truth. I'm proud to bring back with us a gentleman who began with us in the early days on the New York Times Drug Policy Forum, been on the radio show numerous times, and head of the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, Mr. Eric Sterling. Hello, Eric.
Hi, Dean. It's so good to join you again.
Yes, sir. We have been at this a number of years, but we have seen great progress over the years, have we not?
Progress has been remarkable when you recognize that we're trying to change laws that are so deeply ingrained and in which so many people are afraid that if they even talk about, they will be labeled as a drug addict or a criminal.
Sure, wanting to put crack machines in the junior high, right?
Right, reckless with respect to and indifferent to public health and public safety. We are often maligned as selfishly interested only in getting high, which is a really serious misunderstanding of how deeply flawed this policy is.
Exactly. I know that in the last few years, I think since they came into existence, really, the members of law enforcement against prohibition have had a bit of an influence, have they not, within reform? People willing to look at the overall picture, not necessarily to compartmentalize into just medical marijuana, needle exchange, or whatever, but that the whole policy itself is deeply flawed.
LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, is one of the most important organizations in drug policy now. It is the voice of former law enforcement officers, current law enforcement officers who have seen and understand that putting so many of our criminal justice resources into prohibition enforcement is counterproductive, doesn't increase public safety, puts police officers at greater risk, enriches criminals, increases violence, increases corruption, demoralizes the police. And so many other people then are eager to join LEAP because their message is clear, their messengers are very articulate, and it's leading then to numerous news stories and public appearances, interviews, where people say, wow, I get it now. I understand why law enforcement officers say legalize drugs.
Exactly right. Now, you've been at it for an even longer period of time, and you began, if I may say, working for the other side, writing, crafting some of the laws that are now in place, the mandatory minimums.
Yes.
Tell us about that experience.
Sure.
and your Saul turns to Paul. Sure.
Many people like to tell the Saul vision on the road to Damascus and think that I'm another Paul in that regard, and that's not accurate.
All right.
I was a criminal defense lawyer. I supported marijuana decriminalization when I was still in law school in 1976, 30 years ago.
I see.
I testified for marijuana decriminalization.
Well, I won't spread the rumor any further, but it does have a...
I was very lucky that in 1979 I was hired by the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary. Chairman Peter W. Rodino, who had acquired fame just a few years before in chairing the impeachment hearings of President Nixon, was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and I worked for him. I worked for members of Congress on different subcommittees dealing with crime and with criminal justice. And I had a broad portfolio. I had all of the federal anti-drug matters. I had gun control. I had pornography. I had money laundering and organized crime, arson, military assistance to law enforcement. I had a large number of issues that I was responsible for members of Congress to oversee what the executive branch was doing, to help members of Congress write legislation, creating, in those days, more powers for law enforcement, making laws tougher, because that was the prevailing political direction at a time when I worked for members of Congress. They were my client. I was their attorney. I was their counsel to the House Judiciary Committee.
So the idea for these laws didn't come from your mind. It was an assignment.
My assignment generally, yes, was to assist. Now, often in terms of details, my creativity was involved in trying to solve the legal problems that writing such a new law would undertake. For example, prior to 1986, it was not a crime to launder money in the United States. It was a crime not to file the required reporting requirements for large cash transactions or for importing or exporting large sums of cash. Money laundering is the crime of using the proceeds of crime in a way to camouflage their origin,
right,
or camouflage your control and ownership of those funds, so that legal conduct, that is opening a checking account, making a payment, making a deposit in a bank, withdrawing funds, perfectly legal activity as conduct, have to be defined in a way that respects the due process clause of the Constitution and is defined specifically enough that it's criminal. And what makes it criminal are two things. One, your knowledge that the funds are the proceeds of crime, or your intent that the funds are going to be used to carry out a crime, and circumstances. Circumstances being a crime is being planned or a crime has taken place, so that legal conduct then becomes criminal based upon state of mind and circumstances. Writing all of this in a way so that the ordinary citizen is not subject to prosecution because maybe they merely had a hunch as opposed to knowledge. Or here would be an example. Assume for a moment that you are a dentist to a famous mafia figure.
All right.
And, you know, he has been your patient for many years, and you've learned that he is a mafia figure. You say, oh, I'm a dentist, I don't want to have anything to do with him, or I'm a healer, he comes to me, and every time I clean his teeth, every time I give him an x-ray, every time I fill a cavity, he pays me. Now, do I know that the payment is the proceeds of a crime because I know that he's reputed to be a mafia figure?
Right.
If so, am I then guilty of money laundering when I take the check that he writes to my secretary and deposit it in my account at the end of the day?
Yes.
You know? Now, there are those who would argue that in order to socially isolate criminals like that, we should make that conduct criminal. You knew he was a mafia don, that's enough. Now, do I know when he writes a check that this check is the proceeds of, money laundering, loan sharking, labor racketeering, prostitution, pornography, drug trafficking? I do not know this.
Right, right.
So these become, the kinds of questions. Let's take another example. I discover that I'm an officer of a bank, and I have the mortgage on a particular property in Coral Gables, Florida. And who lives in that property is a man reputed to be a narcotics smuggler from Colombia. And each month, a check is deposited to pay down the mortgage on the house. Are we subject to the money laundering laws to be prosecuted because we took the mortgage payment, because we extended this guy a loan? It seemed to our people when the loan took place, it was a very straightforward real estate transaction. Here's the property, here's the deed, everything seemed to be above board. But now, do we have an obligation to go to the federal government and say, by the way, do you know we have a mortgage on, Mr. Gutierrez's house? Well, why are you coming to us? Well, we've read in the newspaper Mr. Gutierrez is a suspected drug trafficker. So,
Yes.
these become issues that sort of surface when you're writing a law.